If you need me, summon me.
So welcome to another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. The Legendino, Tim Vickery, is in situ, looking very dapper as always in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil.
And the night owl himself, Don Adebayo, is looking very Donny Hathaway today. Take it from me, someday we will all be free.
Very good. Funny enough, I was listening to Donny Hathaway doing a duet with Roberta Flack just last night. I think it was.
You just want her to shut up and bring him in, don't you? Can you shut up, Roberta? Can you shut up? Get him in.
No, I'm not having that.
The closer I get to those songs,
exactly.
the more I want to hear Donny Hathaway.
I'm not having that at all, and neither would Donny. You know, I've interviewed his daughter Lala Hathaway a couple of times actually back in the day, and I can assure you, she wouldn't have that on behalf of her father at all.
No. Well, you know what? It's you and I back together again for another Brazilian Shirt Name podcast.
Of course it is. And I'm glad that you mentioned a music link, because for those who don't know, what we do with the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast is take a look at an iconic football match. And today we've got a cracker for you, by the way, an iconic football match, and look at the circumstances around that match, the news of the day, and also the musical soundtrack that accompanied it in the pop charts. So we're looking today, Tim, at people who were there at the time will remember this, because it was one of the best World Cups of all time.
If you're an England fan. But more or less only if you're an England fan.
Well, I was thinking of the bigger picture, you know, Nessun Dorma, etc. Well, anyway, it was one of the great World Cups, Italia 90. We're looking specifically at a match on July the 4th, American Independence Day.
Down with the British.
I'm not
no taxation without representation. How could we expect to win a game on July the 4th?
And don't forget, we have a defense in America that will see off you Brits ignominiously, as Lonnie Donegan would put it, in the Battle of New Orleans. That's another thing. Anyway, England versus West Germany, 4th of July 1990. It's in Naples, of all places. World Cup.
It's north, isn't it? In Turin.
You're right, Turin. Apologies. You're absolutely right, Turin.
The other semi-final was in Naples, and
yes.
It was Argentina-Italy. And the fact that it was in Naples and Maradona stirring it.
Exactly. You knew where I was going there. My mind was going ahead of me.
It started in Naples with Clark Gable and Sophia Loren, and then it moves further north to Turin.
Of course. So that semi-final is done and dusted at the moment. On this 4th of July, we know that whoever wins this match-off between England and West Germany, are they West Germany at that time? Or they're just Germany, aren't they?
It's just at the moment when it's being united, isn't it? So it's probably for them, it's a huge moment because I think it's just happening now.
Of course it is. So this would be the first reunification of a German team since before the war. Then England versus Germany, then rather than England versus West Germany. It always seemed somewhat innocuous when they said West Germany. You know, England beat West Germany in the 1966 World Cup. You always thought, well, what about the other Germany? Would we have beaten them? Is a question I'll leave hanging out there.
Not if they had 11 West Germans and 11 East Germans on the pitch at the same time.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that one out. Sometimes you do state the blooming obvious, don't you? But okay, this match, I remember this match very clearly, and it was one of those occasions where the whole of the country, England that is, felt that this was the moment. It was a hot day, I seem to remember.
Yeah.
And so this would have been an evening kickoff. So it would have been cooler by then, if my memory serves me right. But there was still a buzz around the place. Do you remember where you were?
Oh yeah, I was in the Selkirk pub in Tooting. It's where I'd watched pretty much all the England games. It kind of become a ritual. Going down there to watch it. It was I can still remember some of the people who were in there. There were a couple of girls who were big Steve Ball fans, and they had kind of T-shirts with "Release the Ball" on it. And if I shut my eyes, I can be transported back then to when I was 25 and the world was young.
The world was young, but I'm not sure if you were that young. I'm just looking at photographs of this Selkirk pub in Tooting here. It's a very
It's gone up
grown-up pub,
market.
isn't it? Oh,
Yeah,
it's gone
it's
up
gone up.
market. Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't like that. And this was still when South
Tooting was a
London
roughneck area.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Because I lived in Tooting for a while when I was younger, to be honest. Tooting Beck rather than Tooting Broadway. But here it's very, very nice. I like all the sort of plants outside the building on the window ledge, etc. They've obviously done one of those sandblasting jobs on the old bricks because they look as if they've just been laid, actually. And the whole area looks very nice. The streets are clean outside the Selkirk. But it's on the corner, isn't it? It's on the corner.
I can't remember. I haven't been back since. That's the last time I was ever there. I was only ever there for a few England games during that World Cup, and I haven't been back since.
Well, I can tell you what you can because there's a grill now there as well that you can order food from. I don't know how much.
Chocolate has arrived.
Yeah,
chocolate, emergency supplies of chocolate.
They bill themselves as having great food in a relaxed, friendly place.
Nothing as good as this chocolate that's just arrived from my stepdaughter.
I'm glad to hear that. You go ahead. Don't let me stop you eating the chocolate as we speak. So it's gone up market, and I'm not sure if they show football on their big screens anymore. I'm just looking around the pub, I can't see a screen.
No, maybe not the hooligan element. One of my great mates as a Palace fan, just a month before, it was a final of the FA Cup, and he went to a replay, and Palace they came like 7 minutes away from winning. And when United scored, he threw a glass across the place and smashed the glass. You're barred. So he spent the whole World Cup.
Only barred? Not
yeah,
you're imprisoned.
Yeah. No, only barred. He spent the whole World Cup sneaking in the pub saying, do you think he remembers that he's barred me?
That's how we watch football in those days. And we still do to a certain extent. It's much more of a communal affair now. I think I watched the game on my own, funnily enough. I seem to remember being on my own, going through sort of a difficult period at the time, but totally engaged, by the way, because the great thing about, at least up until this Euros, the great thing about England-Germany matchups is we wait in anticipation for, is this the time? Is this the one that I shouldn't miss? Because this will be the one where England beat Germany in a knockout competition. And it's like when you go to a gig sometimes, you think, I've got to be at this gig because this is the one where the Clash are going to bring on Jimmy Percy of Sham 69. Is this the one they're going to bring him on, or they're going to save it for a later time? You don't want to miss that moment because it's going to spark things up. I seem to remember from 19.
It feels like something like that. It's like the only thing that matters in the world at that time.
Yes, but don't you? Particularly when an artist has left a group somewhat ignominiously, but they're still they're still going around the periphery of the group. At some point they're going to bring them back on stage. At some point Paul Simon is going to say, come on, Art Garfunkel, come back. Come on. You don't want to miss that moment, or George Michael bringing Elton John on stage to sing, which is one of the great live duets of all time. Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me. And in front of an audience at Wembley, and you can hear the roar of approval from the audience at Wembley as Elton John. Is it the other way around? Is it Elton John playing the gig? No, I think it's George Michael playing the gig and bringing Elton John on. But you don't want to be there. You don't want to miss that moment. So it felt like that for me.
If he was still with us, Joe Strummer would be bringing out Dotun Adebayo.
If he was still with us, Dotun Adebayo would be standing at the edge of the stage saying, Joe, can I come on? Like I did in Stockholm all those years ago. Come on, Joe, trust me. Having said that, Ian Dury did bring me on. And this was at Roskilde, which is the equivalent of Glastonbury in Denmark. I was at the stage, I might have told you this before. Basically, Don Cherry, Neneh Cherry's stepfather, brought me on stage, and I won't go into how I met Don Cherry, but long story. So I was at the edge of the stage, and this would have been the equivalent of the pyramid stage, the big stage at Roskilde Festival, early on a Sunday morning, I seem to remember as well, but there were like 50,000 people in front of us. And I'm there sort of like, bopping away, and Ian Dury half looks around and goes like this, come on. I couldn't believe it. I literally was so I was so buzzing that I came on the stage and somersaulted, and I actually successfully somersaulted on the stage. That was how much adrenaline I had in me. It was a huge stage, first of all. Somebody tells you to come on, you don't know what to do. You can't just sidle on the stage. I was probably about 19 years old at this stage. So I launched myself on the stage, do a perfect somersault, and join, I don't remember, probably right at the side of the backing singers, including Don Cherry, joined them for either a round of Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll or Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick. I guess it must have been Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll, but I can't remember rightly.
I'm sure it was very good indeed.
Of course, all of that is by the by, though, because we're talking about 1990, the 4th of July. It was a game that starts off pretty even. The first half was pretty even.
England started off really quickly.
Really well.
Really well. And there are so many levels on which we can compare 4th of July 1990 and what happened on Sunday. There are so many levels.
The 11th of July 2021.
Indeed, yeah. So that's 31 years and 7 days. One of them, sticking totally to the football, is England in 1990 were just so bold, really bold. I mean, I couldn't believe it when the team was announced. We played with 3 centre-backs, Mark Wright sweeping with Des Walker and Terry Butcher. It was Paul Parker and Stuart Pearce were the wing-backs. Lineker's up front. The midfield trio is David Platt, Chrissy Waddle, and Paul Gascoigne. And Platt had he did end up as a deeper, more defensive midfielder, but he'd only just been converted from a striker. That was a midfield trio: Platt, Gascoigne, and Waddle. I'm thinking, who's going to mark? And we're up against Germany with Lothar Matthäus, such a dynamic midfielder. And so who's going to get? There's one position left in the team. There's got to be a change in the team because, very unfortunately for John Barnes, he's injured. Just shows what a thin line there is. In the previous, the previous game was Cameroon, but the game before against Belgium, he scored a fantastic goal that was disallowed for a very debatable offside. So he doesn't stand, and then he gets injured. It could have been his tournament. He was in cracking form for Liverpool, but he's injured, so he has to be replaced. And in comes Beardsley, who was a fantastic player. And I actually wonder, had he been in top form, I wonder whether England could have done better, because I think he was a little bit tired at the end of the season. But I remember when his name was announced, there was a groan in the pub. He ended up having a terrific game. But I was thinking he's going to put another midfielder in there. He's up against Lothar Matthäus with Gascoigne, Platt, and Waddle in the middle of midfield. He's going to put, I don't know, Neil Webb in there or an extra midfielder, and he didn't. It was such a bold lineup. And I thought, they're just going to walk through our midfield. And there were times in the game where we were open. There was space there, although Germany were largely restricted to shots from range. But it was just so bold, and they went out there to take control of the game. And I honestly, when the game started, I thought there are 2 results possible here. Either we lose or we get hammered. And I love that side, but I just couldn't see how in midfield we were going to hold them. But we were so bold and took the game to them that we had them on the back foot for a while.
It's funny, you were looking at it from a much more footballing intellectual position than I was. I was looking at it from those players, and this was something of a generation. We'd had Peter Shilton in goal for eons by this point, and we knew that was going to be hard. Stuart Pearce was like a dynamite in terms of energy levels in defence, but arguably in midfield as well, and sometimes going up very nearly as attacking midfielder. Des Walker, you can't get much better than that when you're talking about defence for England. Terry Butcher famously gave everything, including the blood, sweat and tears for England. I wasn't sure about David Platt. To be honest, but
he was a youngster. He'd only just come into the team, and he'd scored in the 2 previous games.
Sure. Chris Waddle, though, I mean, and he had some chances in this game as well. I think he'd slowed down pace-wise. He'd never been a really fast player, but I think his pace, lack of pace, got the better of him in this match. But on paper, it looked like Chris Waddle, yeah, absolutely, 100%. You could argue as a dribbler, world class. Gary Lineker, well, he was the goal machine, wasn't he, for England at the time? He was the original Harry Kane, if you like, more in the box than Harry Kane would be. But having said that, he did do a little bit of dribbling to score the goal that he scored. I've given away a bit of the game. And Paul Gascoigne, of course, you've got Paul Gascoigne on the field. Anything can happen, including what you...
And you have to remember, this is a time before Sky. So what a TV audience was seeing was quite limited. We knew, as Tottenham fans, Gascoigne, he had a strange career and he did lots of silly things, and that's who he was. But when he came back from his latest injury, kind of March before, the form he was in was so unbelievable. And there's a game we played April, May, maybe early May, against Man United, when he had the whole stadium just gasping. But as Tottenham fans, we knew there was going to be an absolute sensation in that World Cup. But a lot of the rest of the country didn't really know him because they hadn't seen him, because they weren't watching it on TV to the extent. And before the first game, there was a big controversy against Republic of Ireland. Should he be in? Should we play him? And he just took it. Yeah. I remember Kenny Dalglish saying, "No, I wouldn't play him. I'd play Steve McMahon." Admittedly, Kenny Dalglish is from Scotland, but that was a big debate. And then, how could you leave him out? He was extraordinary. At the end of that World Cup, Maradona said, and remember, this is an Argentine saying about an Englishman. Then he said, "This could be my successor as the greatest player in the world." And he was unbelievable in that World Cup. He hit the heights.
Did Gazza know that Maradona had said that? I wonder if...
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Why didn't it make any difference? Because if I'd heard that... Well, I'm not Gazza, I suppose, but for those who don't remember this World Cup, they will remember the moment that Gazza breaks down in tears, or at least...
Changes English football, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah, his eyes welled up with tears because he wanted to be in the final, and at the point where he gets a booking, we don't know if England are going to make it through. In fact, England had the upper hand by that point. Admittedly, they were taking pot shots from long distances, but it looked as if we were going to beat West Germany. That's what I remember so much about. It was West Germany rather than England, but rather than Germany, by the way, at this point. That's why I remember so much about this match. Gazza believed we were going to make it into the finals against Argentina. Yeah, that's why he's crying.
Bobby Robson said to him before the game, "You're playing against the best midfielder in the world, Lothar Matthäus." Wow. And he said, "No, boss, he's played against the best midfielder in the world."
And he said it just like that as well.
Just like that, yeah.
Of course he did. And Gary Lineker believed that they were going to get into the final because, he was telling off on camera, but off the pitch, he was telling Bobby Robson and the coaching team, keep an eye on Gazza. And we all believed we were going to win that one. I mean, generally, from home, at that point where Gazza gets a booking, we believed that we were going to win that one. However...
I have to confess here that when he got the booking, it made defeat so much easier to take, because the idea of playing the final without him, it just wouldn't have been the same. There's been a view in the England camp that we would have won the final. I'm not so sure. In fact, a few months ago, I watched the Argentina semi-final when they beat Italy. Italy were the hosts. And they beat them despite being down to 10 men for quite a lot of the game. And that they're a horrible side, that Argentina side. They had the odd flash of brilliance from Maradona, who was playing on a broken ankle, more or less. But they really were hard to play against. They were compact. And in the final, they got stitched up something horrible. They lost on a penalty that wasn't a penalty. They should have had a penalty. They didn't get one. They had a player sent off for by the standards of the time, nothing. And it was kind of morally right, because Germany were the best side, and you wanted them to win. I think pretty much everyone outside Argentina, and maybe parts of Bangladesh, where they love Argentina, wanted Germany to win. So it was kind of morally the right thing, but they did get stitched up. And had England made it through, I don't think without Gascoigne it wouldn't have been the same. And there's no guarantee that we would have won. And I think it would have been a horrible game. In a way, I think this game stands better as one of our heroic failures. Because we come out, we could have, we nearly did. And maybe in a way that's better than what would have happened otherwise had we won the penalty shootout.
I get that, I do get that. And I think it might have even, and now that you mention it, I think you weren't the only one thinking, it's slightly easier to swallow. It's easier to swallow because Gascoigne wouldn't have been there in the final. I seem to remember, and I don't know if you're just putting the thoughts in my head, but I seem to remember thinking that as well. But was this the first of the timeline of penalty defeats that we had? It's one that sticks out.
I think it might be the first penalty shootout we'd ever had.
Right, yeah, because it sticks out like that for me. And then, of course, we've had a sort of a timeline of penalty shootouts. We haven't lost all of them, but the important ones, the knockout stage ones, we have lost, and in international finals, and so that is another link to what happened on the 11th of July, 2021. I said earlier on that I thought this was one of the most memorable World Cups, and there are loads of reasons for that. Scotland were in it as well, so it's great when you've got two home countries, and they did rather well, actually. I seem to remember them beating Sweden. Was it 2-1 or something like that?
Yeah, but they'd urinated all over the swimming pool in the first game by losing to Costa Rica.
Yeah, well, I was wondering where you're going with the swimming pool. They will appreciate that. They got only narrowly beaten by Brazil, I seem to remember.
Yeah, although new evidence, Brazil had a meeting before that game. Are we going to lose? Because if they won, it was likely that they would face Argentina. And they did face Argentina, and Argentina beat them. Well, that was a travesty of justice, but Argentina beat them. So Brazil weren't sure if they wanted to win that game. Honestly, I'm told by people who were there that they had a team meeting. Do we want to beat Scotland or not?
But they ended up beating Scotland, so why not beat them 10-0 or whatever if they could? If they could, I think
it was a late goal. Yeah, Jim. Yeah, they did. Yeah. Credit to Scotland, they recovered really, really well from losing to Costa Rica.
Another reason that it was Costa Rica. I'll always think of swimming pools when you mention Costa Rica. Another reason why it was memorable as well was because of the soundtrack. And we're going to be talking soundtracks in a moment. I mean, is this the ultimate World Cup theme? People still ask for it over and over and over again. It feels like every other sort of World Cup soundtrack just stands in the shadow of Nessun Dorma.
Yeah, I can live without it. The grandiosity of it. I can live
but isn't there something Italian about it?
There is. It's operatic, it's dramatic.
Exactly. Yes, yeah. And Pavarotti was at the top of his game at the time. They brought together the three tenors, as it were, and everybody thought that they knew a little bit of classical music via the prism of Pavarotti, which, fair point. And I thought it took a genius to think, let's use that. Yeah, let's get something by Pavarotti and use it as a World Cup theme tune. Those are reasons that people remember it. Obviously, afterwards, people will remember it for a certain TV pizza ad, which we won't get into just now.
I don't know that one. I've been away too long.
You don't know that one? Okay. Well, actually, did that come out after 96. But yeah, I think it came out in 96 with Gareth Southgate missing a penalty in the Euros 96. But it referenced back to 1990. I think on that advert, Stuart Pearce and Chris Waddle were there as well. So I've given away a lot of these. First of all, great free kick, I thought, from Germany, even though they were lucky to get a deflection and score.
It's so cruel. It's the one place. It's the only place it's going to score a goal, and it just loops. It's so cruel.
It's cruel. It's jammy and everything else about it. But look at it. It's a game of 120 minutes, and if you take your chances along that way, and I think this is one of the failings of England, that we don't think these international knockout matches are games of 120 minutes. We start thinking about it on the sort of 80th minute, but actually from the very beginning, it's like a chess match. You may lose your queen to start off with. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to lose your queen in the early stages of a chess match, but there's still a long way to go. You've got a lot of pawns that can become queens along the way, for example, so your strategy changes. But as cruel as it is,
as the boxer Brian London once said, I'm just a prawn in this game.
Are you sure that wasn't Del Boy saying that? And finding a sort of I'm just le prawn in this game, he would have said. But England used Paul Parker, a Manchester United defender, as being the attacker to the free kick, the one player that's going to attack the free kick. But they obviously haven't done their job well, because the way the free kick hits him, he doesn't know much about it, and it loops over his head and over Peter Shilton's.
It's just so cruel, isn't it?
It is. But do you not think it was a mistake having somebody attacking the ball in that way?
No, that's standard practice. You try and block the free kick, sure. And you could do that another 500 times, and it wouldn't have the same outcome.
Okay, but what about
the gods of football were just bastards?
Although no, they weren't. Not on that day, because they gave they gave Gary Lineker the opportunity to shine with a really good goal, and there were 2 or 3 other chances that could have gone in on any other day. Chris Waddle had an amazing chance, almost from the halfway line, for example.
Yeah, the whistle had gone. That wouldn't have counted. It was
sure.
And he rattled the post
twice.
Should have had a penalty.
Yes. But the other time he was in the area, he was in the penalty area and shot towards the right. And I think that hit the post again, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And came back. So
David Platt scores one from a free kick that was ruled out. I'd forgotten
offside.
This. It was only, I'd forgotten all about that incident. Oh yeah, offside. Looking at it now, you think, I'm not sure he was offside.
Well, hindsight without VAR is a wonderful thing, isn't it? With or without VAR. So it comes to the end of the match. After 90 minutes, it goes to the inevitable free kicks. Do we know what's going to happen here? Because the Germans look as if
I suspected. But when Stuart Pearce stepped up, I thought, we're all right here.
Yes.
This one's a certainty.
Yeah, because he's going to belt it in. You know that any keeper would be mad to try and even stop it. It's coming at you like a cannonball. And yet,
it's a little bit like the moment 31 years and 7 days later when Marcus Rashford steps up, because I thought, well, he's the penalty taker. He's been brought on to do this. We're all right. And it's the moment. Just at the Stuart Pearce moment and the Marcus Rashford moment are the moments when you think, the devil has written this script.
2 different types of penalties, though. Marcus Rashford chose to place it. Stuart Pearce went for his own, his style, which is to hammer it in as hard as possible. But he's got to hit the target, hasn't he?
Yeah. And well, he gambles, doesn't he? He hits it straight down the middle, gambling that the goalkeeper's going to dive one way or the other. But the goalkeepers have legs, so they can dive and they can still do it. The one place that the goalkeeper will never ever be able to save it is the top corner, and that's what Chrissy Waddle goes for.
Yeah.
And he's not far off, but it's just that thing with nerves, which is the same as Marcus Rashford.
Mm-hmm.
The adrenaline in the moment. You just calibrate it slightly wrong and you miss. And the difference is such a fine line. And imagine if Rashford had got it just a little bit, if he hadn't have tried to get it totally away from Donnarumma, just a little bit, the line is so fine. Penalty shootouts are horrible.
They are. They're much more horrible if your teammate before you has missed, I suspect, because first of all, the Germans, they look confident all the way down to the fifth.
They're great penalties, aren't they? All of them are great penalties.
All of them.
When Shilton is kind of thinking, I'm not going to commit myself. I'm going to give myself the option because one of them is not going to be, in a series of 5, one of them's not. But I don't think you can blame, and some people have, but I don't think you can blame him at all. They're all terrific penalties.
Yeah, but he gambles wrongly every single time. And what happens for the Germans is that there's no pressure on the next penalty taker. Whereas after Stuart Pearce misses that penalty, you can see him on the halfway line with his hands, his head in his hands as Chris Waddle steps up to take that penalty, because he's put a lot of pressure on Waddle. He's put a lot of pressure that wouldn't normally be there. And you could argue that's the same for the 3 in a row miss of England on the.
Do you think it's better that in 90 and in 2011 you get more than one missing? Because at 96 is only Gareth Southgate. And this is the reason I hate penalty shootouts, because in order to conclude, someone has to be the villain. That's why I hate it. I think it's anti the ethos of a collective sport. But at least in 90, there's 2 of them to share it a little bit. And in now there's 3 of them to share it. Do you think that makes it easier?
I don't think that's quite the right question. I think the right question is, you have to think of the penalty shootout. Like I said a moment ago, that a game is a game of 120 minutes. It's also a game of 120 minutes plus a penalty shootout. And a penalty shootout is a conceit of 5 penalties. So if you miss the first one, you shouldn't worry about the pressure, because there's 4 more to go. Like you said about Peter Shilton gambling, out of 5, they must miss 1. And you've got to go with that mindset that, hang on, we ain't done yet. We ain't done yet. We ain't done yet. So in a way, as much as pressure is almost inevitable, if you're looking at it as a conceit of 5 goals, anything, at least 5 goals, anything can still happen. All you've got to do is score yours. And I think that the pressure that's put on, first of all, the last man to take the 5th of 5 penalties, is pressure on him. There's pressure on him. Whereas he should be thinking, no, this is a game of 11 penalties, potentially. And the goalkeeper will take the last one, and he's going to win
that 5th one is either taking to win it or to save it.
Of course it is, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's pressure, and I think there's more pressure on the taker than there is on the goalkeeper. I think the goalkeeper's looking at this and thinking, I can save this. I think the shooter's looking at this and thinking, I can miss this. He can save it. Do you know what I mean? You never ever talk about the pressure on the goalkeepers, and I don't think they have the same pressure. They do have the pressure, particularly if they've let one in. They know they've got to save it, but their destiny is in their own hands. No pun intended. Whereas for the shooter, their destiny is in the hands of the keeper.
Yeah,
see what I mean? It's a different dynamic, and I think if you can get yourself over that psychological mindset that there is absolutely no pressure on anyone at any time in a penalty shootout, it will be a relief for England penalty shooters. That even if you're the 5th man and you're, 2 down, you're still in it. Actually, not if you're the 5th man. If you're the 4th man and there's 2 down, sorry, I was doing my maths, forgive me. If you're the 4th man and you're 2 down, you're still in it. You're still in it. They can still miss twice. Do you know what I mean? And it will extend the penalty shootout.
There's a question that I have to ask you, which is, Paul Parker didn't take a penalty. He did give Lineker the pass for the England goal. Although that's genius of Lineker in the tight space of the penalty area against 3 German defenders. But it's his deflection that leads to that causes the German goal. He's the last one to touch the ball that loops over Peter Shilton. I don't remember any recriminations. Not that there should be. Not that there ever should be. Do you think if Paul Parker had taken and missed a penalty, had it gone on, do you think there would have been anything like the kind of scenes, the kind of reaction that happened after Sunday's game?
It's a really good question. I'll take you back to one of my reflections on this game, watching it again. I'd forgotten about this, and I've talked to you about the 96 Euro Championships before as being the time that I remember that certainly the flag was reclaimed by football fans, the flag of St. George. Here at the World Cup,
in 1990, it's still the Union Jack.
It's the Union Jack. It's the Union Jack. And that, for me, was the equivalent of saying it's the National Front. And we hadn't reclaimed that flag from the far right in the way that the flag of St. George had been reclaimed in 96. Having said that, was it the National Front, or was that something in my head? Because Paul Parker should have got the recriminations. John Barnes would have got the recriminations. You know that. John Barnes would have got it in the flipping neck. And he wasn't in this game. And somehow Paul Parker, it's a good question. I think what saved Paul Parker was not taking the penalties. I do think that. I think the fact that and I'm not making a race point out of this, but I'm saying, look at it from the perspective of people who want to cause mischief. The two white guys missed the penalty. You know, they were the ones that missed the penalty. You'd almost forgotten about Paul Parker being inadvertently responsible for the deflection that resulted in the German goal by that time. So I think he got offered a pass on that one. If he had taken the penalty at that time, I can't say, Tim. I'm thinking about it, and thinking about it, and thinking of what happened on Sunday, 11th of July, 2021, and I don't want to make the comparison. I genuinely don't want to make the comparison. I don't think it's right and fair to make the comparison, because I would be assuming that there was this level of fandom. Remember, there was no social media at the time. So
that's the big difference. That's a huge difference, isn't it?
Exactly. So what has allowed all this nonsense to go on after the Euros, penalty misses, is social media. And I think people have been emboldened by that. I'm not saying in the dodgy pubs of England at some point where there was a gathering of the kind of people who wouldn't have included Paul Parker as a member of the England team, and if he had scored, they would have put it down as a score draw nevertheless, because they'd have cancelled his. I'm sure that there were those people, but they're so marginalized at this point that they're irrelevant. It's different in 2021 when they can make their voices heard via social media.
But this to me is not just a social media thing. It's also, and I'm looking at this from the other side of the Atlantic, those voices that have always been there were at that time, they'd started to be marginalized. And over the last few years, the opposite has happened. And for me, that this has much more to do with race. Race is a visible sign of it, but I see.
You mean 2021, 2021, rather than
2021 rather than 1990. Mm-hmm. I see. I may be reading too much in these things, but I see a lot of this as a generational thing. Mm-hmm. As there's that and 90 is the end of Mrs. Thatcher, but it's the start of Thatcherism. Mm. It's when Thatcherism is the idea that wealth comes not from productive work, but from owning an asset, from owning a house. Mm. That's Thatcherism, and that's embraced by New Labour. And Mandelson, there, you said, when Labour was in government, we're all Thatcherites now. Economically, we're all Thatcherites now. So the generation.
He didn't quite say that. I think he said we're all middle class.
No, he said economically we're all Thatcherites now. Okay. It's an extraordinary quote. The generation that is just a little bit older than us, maybe, who benefited from council housing, from cheaper rents, from paid university if they went to do it, from steady employment, from guaranteed employment. That generation, they have been able to build up assets. and the main asset is the house. That's where their wealth comes from. And now, even though they continue to identify, and this is much more a small town dynamic, I think, than a big city dynamic. Now, they will identify themselves as working class, but they have a vested interest in the price of houses rising more than the price of labour. And as such, they have a vested interest in preventing, if you like, a mass build of council housing, with the fear that that's going to devalue the price of their asset. So really, their vested interest is in shafting their grandkids. Now, that's not a very nice position to take. So they have to find some excuse that allows them to take that position. And that's where the nationalism comes in. Oh, the other side who want to build council houses, they're in favour of terrorists. They hate our country and its history. And that's where all of the nationalism comes in. And obviously, the nationalism has a strong racial content, because there's the one truth that football highlights so clearly is that a considerable part of our working class are not white. So the footballers, the white ones, they got to deal with that. They can't ignore that reality. The small town homeowners, they can ignore that reality, because in their conception, they're not working class. These young non-white kids, they're immigrants or whatever. So it's their little mental construct. That's one of the reasons I think that the aspects of racism can be stoked much more now than they could back in 1990. And in the end, his society evolves one funeral at a time. And looking at the youngsters who this England team is representing, the 2011 team, you're thinking, 2021 team, you're thinking, blimey, that's all right, isn't it? This is all right. We're moving in a good direction. If that's what our young generation are, we're moving in a good in a good direction. So I see this as a generational chasm in which race is one very visible and very toxic aspect. But the problem is bigger. The problem is that economic divide between those who have assets and those who will be in debt for all of their lives. That's why I remember saying to you at the start of the Euros that Gareth Southgate was trying to build a bridge between right-wing nationalists, stand up for the Queen and all that, and the new generation. And it might be able to work for a football tournament, but it's much, much harder in society. And I think we saw in the end, it couldn't even work in a football tournament.
I think your analysis of this is deep. I won't lie, and you've thought about this very carefully, and I can't argue.
I'm like KRS-One. I think very deeply.
Well, I was going to say you're like KRS-One because knowledge reigns supreme over nearly everyone. Anyway, figure it out and you'll know what I mean. But I'm a BBC radio presenter and I have no opinion, as you know. But your analysis was deep. I'll say that. Given that, and this is the great thing about the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, you know, when you hear politicians say, you know, keep politics out of sport, or you gesture politicking by taking the knee, as the Home Secretary so it is being challenged by certainly Tyrone Mings, the England defender, for laying the groundwork, in his view, of the abuse that Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka got after missing those penalties. It's very difficult, isn't it, when you look at football in a more global perspective over time, to argue that you can keep politics out of football. We know
what is England or Scotland or any country. Yeah, it's a political unit. That's all it is. There ain't nothing else.
Apart from that, look at the way that the politicians use success on the football pitch and in other sports as well, but particularly on the football pitch. Harold Wilson famously called an election straight after England won the 1966 World Cup, and he got re-elected as well, by the way. So built up
and lost the next one just after England got eliminated in 1970.
Yeah, it's not a good time to call an election after we've been eliminated. But looking at the front page, and the great thing about this Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, as I was was saying is that we're not afraid to show the history. And part of that showing the history is looking at what was in the newspaper's front pages at the time. July the 4th, Wednesday, July the 4th. It was a Wednesday, this July the 4th, that England took on West Germany, as they were. Front page of the Guardian newspaper, photograph of Nelson Mandela. Remember, he's only been out of prison after 27 years, by this time, 6 months. That's how long he's been out of prison. It's got a photograph of him smiling, looking as dapper as ever. A crowd around him. Man of the moment, it says. ANC leader, as he was then, so he hasn't become president of South Africa, the new South Africa now. ANC leader Nelson Mandela greets supporters at the Park Lane Hotel in London. He's here to meet Mrs. Thatcher, and the ANC were optimistic about that meeting. So here is the man that Mrs. Thatcher has labeled a terrorist previously. Now she has to meet him.
Mandela cell dweller.
Is that what she called him?
No, it's Public Enemy.
Okay.
Make way for the prophets of rage. That's it. Mandela cell dweller. Thatcher, you can tell her. Make way for the prophets of rage.
Also on the front page, Albanians to be allowed to leave the country. Up to 200 Albanians sheltering in Western embassies after days of fierce anti-government rioting in Tirana will be given passports to leave the country. The Hungarian news agency MTI said last night. Their safety would also be guaranteed if they left the missions. A report from MTI quoted. This is Albania, which is supposed to be the most hardcore communist country in Europe, even more hardcore than the Soviet Union, which is unraveling by this time. Soviet splits deepen is the lead story in the front page of The Guardian. Congress shows suspicion at market economy. Gorbachev emerges from votes as the most popular figure. The depth of splits in the outgoing Soviet Politburo was revealed yesterday as leading members bared their thinking before an increasingly mutinous Congress. So the Soviet Union is falling apart now, and its satellite countries across Europe and everything are unraveling even as we speak. This tournament is going on in Italy as if all this isn't happening politically. We can't see it because we're engaged in the tournament. We can't actually see that the world is changing. Europe, of all places where this tournament is being held, is changing before our very eyes.
Albania is so close to Italy.
Indeed.
One of my stepdaughters lived there for a while in a small town. And in this small town, if you were seen speaking to an Albanian immigrant, you would be ostracized.
There you go. There you go.
Albanese. I mean, it's just extraordinary prejudice. And you're right. All this is happening in Europe. I mean, there was a European Championships, obviously 2 years later. And the Soviet Union are not in it anymore. It's that they compete as something called CIS, something like Confederation of States or something like that. So it all seemed a long, long way away from me at the time.
Yeah, we were more concerned about England reaching the final. And News in Brief in The Guardian on that day says, Argentina reach final. Argentina reached a World Cup soccer final last night when they beat the host nation Italy in a penalty shootout at the end of extra time. So the Italians got beaten in a penalty shootout at this time as well. Irony of ironies with, of course, July the 11th, 2021. After a 1-1 draw at full time, again, another sort of reflection on the results in 2021 at the Euros. After a 1-1 draw at full time, Argentina's goalkeeper Sergio Goycoechea saved 2 of Italy's penalty kicks. Argentina will now defend their crown against England or West Germany, whose semi-final match will be decided tonight. Shortly after last night's match, fighting broke out in Turin between English and Italian fans. Is that another echo? There are so many echoes.
Yeah, there's a really good book. I haven't read it for years. It was a guy called Pete Davis who spent a lot of time, he had a lot of access with the England players, but was also out on the streets, called All Played Out. And one of its ideas is that England as a society is just at the end. You know, the kind of people it's producing. Right? He spoke to one of the English hooligans, and he said, "Well, why did you do it? Why did you go on?" And he said, "Well, because the Italians were like, they were taking the piss out of us, talking Italian." And Pete Davis, well, you know,
in Italy.
Yes, the bastards! How dare they? You know, thinking, what has gone wrong?
Don't they know we won the war? We won the war. You know, to stop you making everybody speak Italian and Latin and German. Yeah, this is the result of it, though. Thousands. Can you imagine this? Of police were guarding the campsite where English fans were said to be celebrating Argentina's win. So we're in Italy, we're in a campsite, we're cheering the home team having lost in their semi-final to Argentina. Argentina, who we've gone to war with. There are so many ironies. It's unbelievable. It's unreal.
The biggest irony, it's not irony at all, it's just disgraceful, is that I've eaten all the chocolate. 2 huge bars of chocolate that she bought me. I've eaten them.
I tell you, it's the memory of this final that does it to you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, the more you think about it, the more you're not even thinking about what you're eating.
Comfort eating.
I love it because you'll start looking like me soon, which I've been waiting for years, so that you won't be able to get into that jacket of yours that your Palestinian mate gave to you, and always asks you whether you can still.
Since 1991, yeah,
doesn't matter. I haven't forgotten. It can be as long as you like. So the other aspect of the Brazilian shirt name that we can't forget, essential part, is to look at the charts at the time. So this is the charts from the 4th of July 1990. At number 1, Elton John. I don't even remember this song, Sacrifice, Healing Hands. Do you remember it from the time?
Yeah, it's a sacrifice listening to it. I can't imagine how anyone could like it.
I'm sure you that pun for some time use. But Nessun Dorma is number 2, and I know you think it's something of an earache. That one,
it's not my stuff, you know. But there you go.
It's not. But every time there's going to be a World Cup, that will get back into the charts.
Yeah, it does have a kind of magnificence about it. It does. Yeah, I'll give it that.
And the
grandiosity.
The estate of Luciano Pavarotti will be so delighted every time World Cup comes around, because you will hear that, and particularly if the World Cup is in Europe, but even in South America, I imagine you hear that as well. It Must Have Been Love, Roxette, one of the Swedish groups. Well, Per Gessle is the Per Gessle, as we say in Sweden, is the male half of Roxette. The lady's actually died now, sadly, Marie Fredriksson, but Per Gessle was one of these musical, or should I say pop geniuses from when he was a kid. So this is why I know that the muse reaches you from an early stage. I'm not saying every pop genius is somebody that has just been blessed with talent, because a lot of people work hard at it. But like I heard Johnny Marr saying just the other day to the poet laureate, Simon Armitage, who's one of my favorite writers, by the way. But Simon Armitage is doing a podcast where he's in his shed talking to all the people that he's wanted to talk to. And he used to be a big Smiths fan. He's talking to Johnny Marr, and Johnny Marr is saying to him, look, I'd like to say that, you know, the muse visits you and that's all you have to do. But no, the muse only visits people who put hard work into it. And this can be said of Per Gessle. I remember his initial group was a group called Gyllene Tider, which means something like great times, or, you know, wonderful times, or, you know, Gyllene glittering times, or something like that. Anyway, that group, their first hit was, it's difficult to translate. It's called The Girls. In those days, Sweden had 2 TV channels, TV1 and TV2, as you'd expect, or TV1 or TV2. And this was a song called Flickorna på TV2. So it's the girls on TV2. And the pun was that in Swedish it works, not so much in translation. He puts on the girls on TV2. Let me try and translate it. He turns on the girls on TV2. Did you get that,
Works two ways.
It works exactly. So that was his first big
Mm-hmm.
hit, and they were huge. I mean, they were the equivalent of Take That, or one of those boy bands that were just so huge. Nobody was ever going to match them ever again. And I remember bumping into them just one time because, you know, I was like, my band was like a more kind of like punky reggae band, but, you know, we were the Rebels. And we bumped into them when we were on tour somewhere, maybe down where they used to live. They used to live, or they came from the south of Sweden. And we were on tour, I think, down there. We bumped into them maybe at a studio or something like that. And, you know, we just like let them have it, you know, gave them, you know, like, you know, tossers or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
Until today, I think it's one of the most stupid things I ever did. You know, it is the equivalent of Jarvis Cocker doing that humiliation of Michael Jackson at the Brit Awards. You remember that? You know, when Michael Jackson was at the Brit Awards and he did, you know, he made all these, he ran on stage and started, well, he ruined Michael Jackson's set, which for an artist to do that to another artist is unforgivable. Yeah. And I think he regrets it now, because when Michael Jackson died, he didn't apologize for it, but he acknowledged that Michael Jackson was a great artist. But he kind of like did, it's all flaff, this is all wind, and, you know, made gestures which were demeaning. I did a similar thing to Per Gessle of Yilla Natida. Until today, I regret it, because he went on and showed that he was a much more talented musician than I was.
Do you know what the lines on your face are? The lines
on my face.
No, okay. Just in general. No. The lines on your face are the remnants of those moments when you've hurt someone and you can't do anything to change it. That's why you get lines on your face.
You see, I haven't got lines on my face because I didn't hurt him. He looked at me and thought, who on earth are you lot? You know, who on earth are you lot? You honestly think that we care about what you think? And I went on my tour with my tail between my legs. Number 5, Sign of the Times, Oops Up Snap. They were dominating with this sort of like high energy.
Yeah, what I only thought this about them the other day. I'd forgotten how much kind of craft work is in there.
There's a lot.
I'd forgotten that. I just Euro disco, but it's a kind of meeting of cod American rap.
Mm-hmm.
No, pump up the jam kind of cod American rap.
Yeah.
Euro dance, but also that there's the legacy of the German tradition of craft work in there.
Yes, 100%. And they modernized it. Is what these people do. When we criticize them a lot, you know, people criticize Oasis for riffing off the Beatles, but all they've done with the Beatles is take the best sort of chord structures of the Beatles and modernized it for a modern audience. And the same, as you know, with rap music when it came to James Brown's, particularly the funky drummer. All they did was take the best bit out of James Brown musically and think, okay, let's beef it up now, which is what MC Hammer at number 9 with You Can't Touch This does to Sly and the Family Stone.
Yeah.
So the Sly and the Family Stone song was it? I can't remember which Sly and the Family Stone song it is that he takes it. Dum, 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 dum.
Is it?
No, it's Rick James.
Rick James.
Yeah, I think it's Super
She's
Freak.
a sophisticated. Yeah, Super Freak. Yeah.
Super Freak. Sorry. It was another group that took Sly and the Family Stone. I think that was Arrested Development, if I'm right. Anyway,
Everyday
this is
People.
Super Freak. Yeah. You can't tell. I remember I arrived in Los Angeles in 1990, January 1990, to be there for 6 months to work on a newspaper. And one of the first interviews I did was with MC Hammer. And this was about to become the next big thing, because MC Hammer was only like a second division, on a national scale, second division rapper. But up in Oakland, California, Northern California, he was the bee's knees, because what he had done at this time when gangster rap was vying for position, he offered rap another route, and particularly a rap pop audience another route. Yeah, a dance, not just pop, dance, because he was an amazing dancer.
He was.
I could have done without the baggy trousers, the sort of Aladdin baggy trousers, but that was their thing, and they got it. And when you went to a gig with MC Hammer, there was everybody just using up their energy to dance in this way. It was a proper, and it was just a great dance sequence on the video. If you watch it today, you know, you can't touch this, doom, 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 doom. And he wasn't the greatest rapper.
No,
he wasn't the greatest rapper, but that is one of the greatest rap tunes ever. I'm sorry. I feel that one just blew my mind. And, you know, props to Rick James and everything else, but you've got to look at the way that he modernized the format, the soul, funky. And remember, on the South Coast, but at this time, 1990, on the East Coast, where contemporary rap comes from, out of Brooklyn or the Bronx more precisely, they're still engaged in making their own beats. Yeah, they're still engaged in the legacy of electro music, which was the foundation for rap for many years. Whereas, and this you could see when, because at this time, it was just when NWA split up, at least Ice Cube left NWA, you know, and remember, I'm very close, or at the time, very close friends with Dr. Dre, who's my closest friend when I lived in California, indeed. And what Ice Cube did, Ice Cube had split up just before I got to LA. So I knew Dr. Dre, I knew Eazy-E, I knew DJ. I didn't really know MC Ren so much, but I knew the DOC who Dr. Dre was producing at the time, and he was number one as well. The Diggy Diggy Doctor was his phrase before Dr. Dre started working with Snoop Doggy Dogg. So what happened, and I did interview Ice Cube, it would have been about June of 1990, so a month before this final in New Orleans. And what he had done when he broke off from NWA, there were all sorts of contractual issues around that. So he went to work in New York, and New York was seen as the enemy of LA. Certainly the New Yorkers thought the people in LA on the West Coast were just trying to do some kind of lame form of rap, and they were
laid back.
Not even laid back. They were using old school funk tunes and rhythms, and they were coming with a gangster rap, but they had Jerry curls, man. Jerry curls. New Yorkers couldn't understand that. You saw, who are these damn, you know, I don't want to use a vulgar word, but it begins with P and ends with Y. Who are these guys? You know, they couldn't get it. They couldn't understand why you're using Rick James bass lines or whatever it is for your thing. So Ice Cube went to New York to work with the Enemy, and these are the guys behind the Bomb Squad, behind Public Enemy. In fact, Ice Cube linked up with Chuck D of Public Enemy, and Chuck D introduced him to Hank Shocklee and his brother, who were the Bomb Squad, the people who laid the beats for Public Enemy. So the first Ice Cube album, which was called America's Most Wanted, America with a K, America's Most Wanted, suddenly you're hearing sort of new beats to the rap, and they just weren't as good as what Dr. Dre was doing with old beats to the rap, you know. So these guys were modernizing the greatest sort of funky beats that there'd ever been, and you can hear that again further down the charts when you get to what those ladies called, who basically
En Vogue.
En Vogue. And basically, this is the sound of Soul II Soul. When I get to California, when I get to Los Angeles, driving from the airport, so I'd have been there, you know, beginning of January 1990 or thereabouts. It's certainly January 1990. First thing I see, huge billboard on Sunset Boulevard as I'm being driven from the airport to the Grammys of Jazzy B, my homeboy, you know, and he's going to get the Soul Train Awards and get some Grammys there as well. But this is his sound that En Vogue kick off with, and they looked like they were going to take over. I mean, they're basically Destiny's Child had the career that they disintegrated, which is a little bit sad because they were very good. And this Hold On was their first single off that first album. And Phil Chill remix of Diana Ross's I'm Still Waiting. Give a shout out to that.
Well, hang on. There's another version of that in the charts.
Okay.
By Courtney Pine and Carol Thompson.
Indeed.
Should have been number one for 6 months. Great version. There's another thing lower down the charts that I really want your take. We nearly got into this when we did the game from a couple of months earlier. It was Crystal Palace Liverpool FA Cup semi-final that we did with Kevin Day, but we didn't have quite have time. And that's lower, right at the bottom of the charts. They've just come back in. Is a couple of Happy Mondays tracks, because this is the absolute height of the Happy Mondays. It's them. And when I was watching some of the scenes that were going on Sunday in England, people openly doing cocaine in public places and so on, I just thought of the Happy Mondays, because I mean the reason that they are the Happy Mondays is they don't have to go to work. It's the Manchester working class rebelling against any idea of work. And I love the fact that when they went to, was it Mauritius or somewhere, to do an album with Tina Weymouth and Chris France out of the Talking Heads, Tina and Chris just couldn't get their heads around it. They thought they'd seen everything. And they said, we come from the New York bohemian scene, the people who are constantly pushing against limits. But with the Mondays, we've come up against people who have absolutely no concept that there are such a thing as limits. And when I look at aspects of England now, I mean, like the wild hedonism and the cocaine and so on, I think the Mondays were there for, they were like the prophets of this. What did you make of them then, and what do you make of them now?
I'll tell you what, I loved the Mondays so much, that I used to quote one of their lines, which
Dad, I'm 30. Yes, son, I'm 30.
Yeah.
It's the greatest. Son, I'm 30. I only went with your mother because she's dirty. There's a whole world in those two lines. It's not a very pleasant world. I don't want to spend any time in that world. I like showers too much, frankly. But
I was going to quote a line which was more about the size of your member, but I'll leave that to one side because it wasn't always politically correct in a racial way. But the racial aspect has got to come into this, because this was a white guy's thing. I sit on both fences sometimes because, I've got friends who are white and friends who are black and always have had. And I've had... Well,
surely that's part of the English strength that we have grown up together.
Exactly. Although for my generation in the 70s and 80s particularly, we were pushed so far away from the margins. I know a lot of people who grew up, went to school like me and everything, don't have white friends, and because it was a time of resistance and suddenly there was this like divide. So they would never have gotten involved with punk music. There were very, very few black people who were at punk gigs, very, very few, until punk and reggae started coming together in terms of live gigs. But the reggae crowd always stood aloof for the punk. They weren't going to be gobbed on, no way. They wore their best clothes to gigs. They didn't come in ripped t-shirts and safety pins stuck in their hearts.
Why do you think I've never been to a festival? All that fucking mud. Fuck off.
I know.
Or mud.
But it's fun. For me, it's
fun.
These
shoes.
Sometimes I have to put on my white boy hat and engage in that as well. But you're right. A lot of black guys, even the reggae festivals, there's a big reggae festival called Rototom in Spain. I think my missus has either played there or was going to play there or whatever. And there, you hardly see any black people. It's like a reggae festival. The most we had was Reggae Sunsplash, but that was in Jamaica. It wasn't muddy in Jamaica at all,
Look at these shoes. Look at these shoes.
Very nice shoes.
Brian Jones style.
Okay.
I'm not going to take these shoes. I'm not doing it.
It's not happening. Look at those feet. Actually, maybe you shouldn't look at those feet.
They're made for walking.
Exactly. Miles and miles and miles and miles. Back in the day, we couldn't afford the buses. But, I think and again, the sort of, it's funny, the Clash, when they first started talking about rude boys, rude boys, rudies, the white, particularly two-tone guys took it on board. They were like the rudies. But of course, rudies, as we knew them, were Jamaican guys. And they weren't rudies just rebellious. They were rudies with style. They still dressed in their Sunday best all the time. And there was only so far that they would go. When you go to a dance as a black guy, certainly in those days, and probably still very much now, you're a little bit cool at the dance. You're not headbanging. We just don't quite get that. So there's always an element of, and I hope people aren't taking this in terms of race. I'm actually trying to say that we are all one, but our experiences take us one way or another. I was brought up, you said Happy Mondays was about the joy of not going to work. Well, my background is and the background of everybody who are second generation or perhaps even third generation immigrants is work twice as hard. When Happy Mondays are taking their day off or not going to work, that's all right. We'll take those jobs and we'll work twice as hard in those jobs to be able to get our foot on that ladder. So the experience of like going off and getting off your head because you are, you know, you don't have to work, you can sign on the dole or get a pop hit and not have to work and take lots of drugs. That doesn't feature in the landscape that I was brought up in.
No, because you're looking for inclusion. You're looking for a way in,
and we're looking for a foot on the ladder as well. And the only thing available for us is to work hard. And our parents told us that you got to work twice as hard, whether at school or whatever it is. And I didn't listen because, like I said, I'm like one foot in either camp. So when I got my my grant to go to university, I pissed it, half of it down, you know, the student bar, and the other half I bought a motorcycle with it. I didn't do the sensible thing and squirrel it away and think I'll put that down as a deposit to get a house, so I'll have my foot on the ladder. No, not me. I was like the Happy Mondays to a certain extent, you know. But it's a good question you ask. Got to give a shout out to Belle Biv DeVoe's Poison. They were 3/5, I think, or 3/6 eventually of what was New Edition with Bobby Brown initially. They were just kids coming out of Boston. But that
Bobby Brown was everywhere at this time.
He was, wasn't he? Yeah, because he had that incredible album, Don't Be Cruel, his first solo album. And I remember very clearly when it came out, and you knew that he was going to be a huge star. In fact, if you look on my Twitter account, you'll see a photograph of me with him when his hair is going to the side slightly, when he had a little bit more hair on his head as well. There are a few good tunes there that we could talk about. I know we're running out of time now.
There are a few shit ones that...
Yeah, there's a lot of shit ones. There's a lot of
Wilson
shit ones.
Phillips.
Yeah.
Well, Wilson Phillips, they would have fucked up, screwed up kids of the Beach Boys, and it's the proof that talent doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily inherited. It's like the most vacuous West Coast self-help book being put to a soundtrack of horrible 80s big drum sound. It's horrible.
Yeah, it might be horrible, but how do you explain that they're in the top 10 at number 8? How do you explain that?
Elton John was number 1 with Sacrifice.
Enough said.
People went to see 2 weddings and a funeral.
Enough said, Tim. Okay, that's good enough for me. Oh, yeah.